NASCAR's two most recent Cup Series champions got into it a little bit after Sunday's race at the Roval, but did Martin Truex Jr. take his retaliation a little too far? We're going to talk about that and much more in today's show, so hope you're excited. How's it going, everyone? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. Like I said at the beginning, we have a lot to talk about today, a lot of diverse topics, so it should be kind of interesting. I hope you guys are excited, but yeah, let's just jump right in. I want to start today's episode by talking about kind of the top story after Sunday's race, the thing that I saw a lot of people still talking about Sunday night and then into Monday, and that was the conflict between Martin Truex Jr. and Jimmie Johnson at the end of the race. If you didn't watch the race, coming to the checkered flag around the final two turns, Jimmie Johnson spun out while trying to make a pass on Truex for the win. When he spun out, he ended up collecting Truex in the wreck. Both of them wrecked, which caused Ryan Blaney, or allowed Ryan Blaney to slip through to win the race. After the checkered flag, Martin Truex Jr. was unhappy with Jimmie Johnson, so he drove up behind him and spun him out on the cool-down lap. And then on pit road after the race, both drivers kind of gave their sides of the story of the incident on track, and that's where, it was interesting. A lot of fans were kind of surprised by some of the responses and how that whole incident played out. I saw a lot of fans on social media especially rush to defend Jimmie Johnson in this case. A lot of people were really mad at Martin Truex Jr. For how he retaliated afterwards and for his comments after the race. I'll go and read his post-race comments he made to NBC because I think that helps give some backstory to this whole case. When talking about the incident at the end of the race, Truex said Jimmie Johnson, wasn't ever going to make it through that corner whether I was there or not. Just desperation on his part, and pretty stupid really if you think about it, because he was locked into the next round and now he's out. I guess if there's a silver lining, that's it. Those were Truex's comments he made to NBC, and he's referring to the fact that Jimmie Johnson, before that wreck on the last lap, was 7 points to the good in terms of making it to the next round of the playoffs. After spinning out and collecting Truex in that whole wreck, he ended up missing the playoffs by 1 point. And so a lot of fans I saw were upset with Truex over those comments. I think a lot of people really took exception to the fact that he called Johnson's move a stupid move. I think when he used the word stupid, a lot of people immediately jumped on the anti-Truex bandwagon, which in all fairness was maybe a little too strong of a word. I don't know if I would have used that word, but I did say in my video Sunday afternoon that Jimmie Johnson's move was un-Jimmie Johnson-like. It was not a good move on his part. I talked after the race on Sunday about how, Jimmie Johnson's always been good at seeing the big picture. Him and Chad Knaus, that's why they've won so many championships with so many different playoff formats, is because they can always fall back and look at the big picture. And him, wrecking himself and wrecking Truex at the end of the race on Sunday was not Jimmie Johnson looking at the big picture. And I was surprised by that, and, it was a bad move. Was it a stupid move? I wouldn't use that word, but it was a bad move. So Truex isn't wrong in saying that. A lot of fans were also unhappy with Truex spinning Jimmie Johnson out on the cool-down lap, after the race. This happens a lot, but after the race, Truex was unhappy with Johnson after they crossed the finish line already, drove up behind Jimmie, and going into turn one, just spun him around. A lot of people were unhappy with that, and again, I don't really see why. They were going low speed. He didn't slam him into the wall or anything. He just spun him around. We see people do it all the time. We saw it a couple weeks ago at Darlington in the Xfinity race when Ross Chastain and Kevin Harvick wrecked each other racing for the lead, and Chastain then spun out Harvick out during the caution. But in that incident, everyone was on Ross Chastain's side. They were all like, yeah, screw Harvick. In this case, everyone's like, oh, screw Truex. Obviously, I'm not an idiot. I understand that Jimmie Johnson's a very popular driver in the sport, and he's a very classy driver. So whenever somebody makes kind of a move like this, an anti-classy move against him, it's kind of shocking. But I'm still surprised by how many people defended him, or more so, how many people said afterwards that they lost respect for Martin Truex Jr. Think about this incident from Truex's side for a minute, if you will. Martin Truex Jr. has 4 wins this year. He's got a good amount of bonus points, but still significantly less than Kyle Busch, than Kevin Harvick. He's around the same area Brad Keselowski's at now, because Keselowski's been on such a roll. Coming to the checkered flag there, Martin Truex Jr. didn't do anything wrong. He had the lead, he had the rightful position out front. He was just going into those final 2 turns, going to make them nice and easily, was likely going to win the race, get 5 more bonus points, which would have been huge. Maybe not for this round, he was already locked into the next round, but for the round of 12, for the round of 8, those 5 points, as we've seen in historical in the last few years, those 5 points could be very important. So if you're Martin Truex Jr., you do nothing wrong, you're just going to go collect your 5 bonus points for winning the race, and all of a sudden Jimmie Johnson comes spinning out of nowhere and takes you out, costing you not only just the win and the glory and the trophy, but also 5 potentially important bonus points. And Truex didn't do anything wrong. He didn't do anything to deserve that. It just happened. I know Jimmy Johnson didn't wreck Truex intentionally, but he was intentionally making an aggressive move, and it didn't work for him. It was an irresponsible move by Jimmy Johnson. And I respect the heck out of Jimmy Johnson. You know, after the race, he owned up to it. He admitted to it that it was an aggressive move and that he made a mistake. He apologized for it right away. And that's part of why I love Jimmy Johnson. He's one of the classiest guys, one of the most respectful drivers or professional athletes in all of sports. But that doesn't mean Martin Truex Jr. is not allowed to be a little angry. And I didn't think any of his retaliation went too far. Like I said, he just dumped him after the race. You know, at that point, the race was over. Points didn't matter anymore. He just spun him out. And he just, like I said, he didn't slam him into the wall. They weren't going that fast. He didn't really damage either of their cars more than they already were damaged. So I didn't really get why so many people were upset with him. I guess maybe his post-race comments rubbed them the wrong way, and I'm sure a lot of Jimmy Johnson fans were already a little upset by the fact that Jimmy, you know, kind of suddenly missed out on the next round of the playoffs, you know, kind of came out of nowhere. So I get that this was a really difficult moment for Jimmy Johnson fans. I can completely understand that, but I hope that when they go back and look at this whole incident objectively now, a couple days later, hopefully they can kind of understand that, you know, I don't think Martin Truex Jr. overreacted. I think he reacted exactly how most drivers would in that situation, and that's how we've seen other drivers react. So I don't think anything Truex did was over the line. I think he was just frustrated and, you know, went about it the way most drivers would and didn't hurt anyone in the process. So I think it was fair game. I love Jimmy Johnson. I know he didn't mean to wreck anyone, and I know I'm very impressed that he owned up to it right away the way he did. That's why Jimmy Johnson's so well liked among fans. But that doesn't mean Truex isn't allowed to be a little frustrated. You know, that's my point. Moving on from that, I want to play a little game or a little segment here that I'm going to try. It's a little new here. It's called Where I Was Right and Where I Was Wrong. You know, going into this weekend, you know, every week I make a lot of predictions, and, you know, I get a decent amount right, but I also get a decent amount wrong, and I think this might be a fun little way to kind of review some of my previous predictions and just kind of see what I got right and, of course, see what I got wrong, because, you know, there's always a little bit of both. So as you can see up here, I'm going to start with where I was right in some of my predictions going into the Roval. First big thing I was right about coming into this weekend, I predicted the Roval would be chaos, a chaotic race. You know, a lot of people thought it would either be chaotic or it'd be really conservative with not a lot happening. I, of course, sided on the chaotic side, and sure enough, especially in the second half of this race, it was a chaotic mess. I can't take too much credit for this, though. I mean, a lot of the drivers going into it were saying that it was going to be chaotic. Most of the fans thought it was going to be chaotic, so I think most of us were right in assuming it was going to be a chaotic race. But I'll still give myself a small point there. You know, I went with the crowd, and in this case, it was a good decision. Another thing I was right about going into this weekend was Jimmy Johnson. Coming into this race, I told you guys to look out for Jimmy Johnson. You know, I knew Charlotte, you know, the Roval was likely to be kind of a track that was highly dependent on driver skill rather than, you know, how good your car is handling. And I think we all know Jimmy Johnson's a great driver, and he hasn't had great cars this year, but I thought going into the weekend, and I said this on an episode last week, that this would be a great opportunity for Jimmy to showcase his skill and have one of his better runs of the season. And sure enough, he did just that. I know he didn't win the race, and I already talked about the last lap incident with him, but for most of the race he had one of the best cars, was running in the top 5 for a lot of it. Even when it turned into kind of a fuel strategy race, he was still right there with the top 5. He was running up there with the big 3, even beating the big 3. He was faster than Truex on that final restart, you know. So Jimmy Johnson had one of his best performances of the season. I hope Jimmy Johnson fans at least enjoyed that part of the race. You know, I know the end result was bad, but hopefully the first 99% of the race was fun to watch because, yeah, Jimmy had one of his best runs of the season, and I told you guys to watch out for him. I thought that would happen, so I got that one right. And the other big thing I was right about after this weekend is that the Big 3 really doesn't exist anymore. I know a lot of you guys gave me grief a couple weeks ago when I made that video where I said that the Big 3 narrative was dead, and then the very next week they went out and finished first, second, and third. Terrible, terrible timing. But even then, I defended my comments because I still truly believe them, and I think after this weekend's race at the Roval, I'm still feeling pretty good about my decision, my thoughts. I know the Roval's kind of a different track, but the Big 3 really were not a big factor in this race. The 3 best cars all race long were Brad Keselowski, Kyle Larson, and Jimmy Johnson. Martin Truex Jr., I know he took the lead on that final restart, but that's only because Keselowski and Larson wrecked the restart before. Kyle Larson and Ryan Blaney swept the stages. You know, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick were running around the top 5 most of the race. Truex too. They weren't bad. They were still relatively competitive, but they were not the teams to beat. And that's been a continuous trend these last 4, 5, 6 weeks, and that's what I've been saying, and that's why I made my comments, and that's why I stand by them. And after this week, I think they've proved me right once again. If you look at the last 6 races, only one of them has been won by a Big 3 driver. 1 win in 6 weeks, that's not dominance. So if you're not dominating anymore, you can't be called the Big 3. Like I've said for the last couple weeks, it's the Big 4 or Big 5, and on any given week it could be the Big 6. And the Roval showcased that once again. So that's what I was right about. Now we can have some fun, talk about a couple things that I was very wrong about going into this weekend. I am only human. I do make wrong predictions. I'm not a perfect supercomputer or anything. The first big thing I was wrong about this weekend, I thought that the young drivers would really struggle in this race. I thought that this race, the Roval, would be dominated by the veterans. I said this last week, looking at the tests from over the summer, a lot of the young guys like Blaney, Bowman, Jones, etc., Byron were wrecking a whole lot more, and the veterans really weren't having too many issues. So I thought going into this weekend that the veterans would be the guys to beat, and that the young guys would mostly struggle. I was very wrong. Like I said, Kyle Larson and Ryan Blaney swept the stages, and those are a couple young guys, so I was wrong there. Sure, Brad Keselowski, Jimmy Johnson were really good, and those are veterans, but Kyle Larson was really good too. Ryan Blaney obviously won the race. Chase Elliott ran in the top 10, top 5 for most of the race. And as far as wrecks are concerned, Brad Keselowski, a veteran, ended up causing the biggest wreck of the day. So I can't really say the young guys were like way better than the veterans or anything, but they definitely weren't worse. It was pretty evenly spread out all day long. So I was wrong on that one. I admit it, I got that one wrong. The other big thing I got wrong, and this one I was way off on our podcast that we do every Wednesday, it was on my channel last week, we always give our who's gonna suck each week predictions, and my prediction this week was that Ryan Blaney would struggle. I thought Ryan Blaney, he wrecked in tests and even in practice early in the weekend. He hit that inside wall in the backstretch chicane and kind of tore up his left front a little bit. I'm like, he's gonna have a bad weekend, he's gonna struggle. Coming into the weekend, I thought Ryan Blaney would struggle, and I thought he'd miss the playoffs, I thought he'd fall below the cut line, but boy, he and that team figured it out. They figured this track out. Ryan Blaney ended up winning stage 2, and of course he put himself in position to take advantage of the last lap shenanigans, and Ryan Blaney ended up winning the freaking race. So I ended up being about as wrong as you could possibly be on that prediction. I admit it, I can laugh about it. Happy to see Ryan Blaney move on. Very impressed with his run at the Roval. But yeah, I was wrong. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that game, where I was right, where I was wrong. I don't know if I'm going to do that every week, but I might do that from time to time from now on, because it might be kind of fun. Let me know in the comments if you guys like that, if you want me to do that more regularly or not, and I'll factor that in. The next thing I want to talk about has to do with NASCAR TV ratings. I know you guys see the TV ratings there, and you guys are like, oh gosh, he's going to talk about how NASCAR's failing. Oh no, this is going to be rough. But I'm pleased to say that we actually get to talk about some good things for once regarding TV ratings. Last year, the Bank of America 500 at Charlotte Motor Speedway was run on a Sunday afternoon on NBC, and that race earned a 1.8 overall rating. And now I don't know exactly how that number ends up correlating to real viewers. I would guess it's around 3 million viewers. Don't quote me on that. Maybe one of you guys let me know if I'm right or wrong. It's somewhere around there, I think. This year's Bank of America Roval 400 was also run on a Sunday afternoon, also on NBC, and I'm pleased to say that this year's race had an overnight rating of 2.0, otherwise known as a 10% increase from the same race a year before. An increase! Can you guys believe it? This whole season we've just talked about how ratings are dipping week after week after week. But this week we actually had a 10%, not just like a 2 or 3%, a 10% increase. That is substantial. We're talking several 100,000 more people decided to watch this race. That's whole cities. So that's a big deal. Obviously the Roval, the whole hype behind the Roval, this new unpredictable track, is what drew them in. And I think, we can all say that this was a successful weekend for NASCAR. And I'll be honest, I'm just so thrilled that this race was as exciting as it was. Imagine if, a bunch of extra people tune in, we get like 4 million viewers, but then they end up watching this race and it turns out to be really boring and a total snooze fest and really disappoints, doesn't live up to the hype. Man, all those new fans that decided to tune in would be so disappointed. But nope, instead we got all these new fans. We probably had close to 4 million people watching this race on TV, and they ended up getting to see one of the best NASCAR races of all time. So that's got to make everyone in NASCAR feel good. Everyone at NBC's got to be feeling good. Just a round of applause overall. So yeah, bet you guys didn't expect us to talk about positive things regarding TV ratings this year, so that's good to see. The last thing I want to talk about, doesn't really have to do with the Cup Series, but it's a pretty big story. That's why I felt like I should discuss it this week. Hailie Deegan has made quite the name for herself in the last couple of years. She's a 17-year-old NASCAR K&N Series driver, and this last Saturday night, she made history by becoming the first female driver to win a K&N Series race. And this was a big deal for everyone in the NASCAR world. There are top Cup Series drivers, top athletes from around the country were chiming in to congratulate Hailie Deegan on this win. Just a little K&N Series win, that's all it was, but she caught national media attention. And now I don't have to tell you guys how important it is for a young female driver to see NASCAR success. That's important for the sport. In terms of publicity, in terms of PR, in terms of boosting its ratings going forward, it's important for young drivers, especially if you have a young female driver who can potentially bring in a whole new audience. It's important if she's running well and winning races. So this was a huge news story. It was almost as big as the Cup race at the Roval was. Had almost as many people talking about it felt like. And so as happy as I am for her, and as hopeful as I am that she could potentially carry NASCAR's popularity into the future, I'm still just a little bit worried that she's overhyped. Don't get me wrong, I get that she's a good driver. She's one of the best K&N Series drivers out there. She's really got a shot at racing at NASCAR's top level in the next few years. But I'm just worried that we're putting a lot of pressure on a 17-year-old driver who hasn't really seen any time outside of a short track yet. Her stats in the K&N Series this year are pretty good. This win, is obviously amazing. But she still has years until we ever have a shot at seeing her in a Cup Series car. She's already getting so much media attention. People seem to think she could be the next Jeff Gordon, a female Jeff Gordon, which would be huge for the sport. And I just think that's a lot of pressure to be putting on her. I think I'm also a little gun-shy after the whole Danica Patrick career sort of debacle. Danica Patrick was a good IndyCar driver. She came over to NASCAR because there's more money here. And over the 5 years she raced in the Cup Series, she was never very good. She was in a good car and really was never able to do much with it. And over time, I think people started to kind of resent her being in the sport whatsoever. People just started to believe that she was only in the sport because she was a woman. And they're not entirely wrong, because the results weren't there, and she kept a top ride for 5 years. And so at the end of the day, when she eventually left NASCAR after last season, I feel like a lot of people were kind of feeling like, good riddance. And it's unfortunate that's the case, because Danica Patrick was a driver who spent her whole career racing open wheel and IndyCar stuff, and to come over to race stock cars, she didn't step into a stock car until her late 20s. She kind of had to do a lot of learning on the fly, so really wasn't that surprising that she never saw great success in NASCAR. The odds were stacked against her from the beginning. But still, at the end of the day, when people mention Danica Patrick in NASCAR, it's usually viewed negatively. She had all this hype behind her and never lived up to it, and now she's seen as kind of a negative for the sport in a lot of ways. And I can't really compare Danica Patrick to Hailie Deegan. Hailie Deegan's, she's still in her teens. She spent most of her career so far racing stock cars, so by the time she eventually does get into the top series in NASCAR, she's going to have a lot more stock car racing experience than Danica Patrick did. And that alone is extremely important. If you're going to ask me who's going to end up having a better NASCAR career, Danica Patrick or Hailie Deegan, I think Hailie Deegan's going to end up being better. But is she going to win a bunch of races? And is she going to run for championships? I'm not ready to say yes, definitely. And she could. She definitely could. I'm not going to say she's not, because she's clearly got talent. She definitely could. But I feel like a lot of fans are already kind of hyping her up as, like I said, like the next coming of Jeff Gordon. And that's just a lot of pressure to put on someone who's not even out of high school yet. I'm hoping the best for Hailie Deegan, and I really do think she's going to be good. I'm just a little worried. Maybe a few years from now she'll show up in a NASCAR's top level, win Rookie of the Year, win a race or two, and I'll look back at this video and be like, man, why was I ever worried? But I'm just a little concerned right now that she's being overhyped by everyone in the sport and all the fans. And, that's not a bad thing if she does live up to it. If she lives up to this hype, that would be incredible. But, man, it's so much hype. I don't think anyone could live up to some of the hype she's getting. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I'm a little concerned. I think she'll be good, but I don't know that for sure. Anyway, y'all, that's my show. Yeah, a lot to talk about, a lot of different storylines. Hopefully you guys enjoyed hearing my thoughts on all that. I'd like to hear what you guys have to think on all these topics. Let me know down in the comments below. And yeah, thank you guys for watching this video. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Links are down below as well. You can also sponsor the show like these amazing people right here. If you want to support me or the show directly, I highly encourage you to check out that top link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to check that out. It means a ton to me. I really appreciate it, honestly. Anyway, yep, thanks to everyone for watching. I'll have another video up in a couple days. We'll talk about Dover. We'll talk about the next round of the playoffs, give you my predictions there. And yeah, other than that, I'll see you guys then. Thanks everyone again for watching. I'll talk to you next time.